Okay, am I live? Uh, am I live or not? I'm not sure if I'm live. Okay, I think I am. Okay, as usual, I start with we're spiritual beings in a physical body. Our thought creates reality, or contributes at least at the present time to the world around us. I have to emphasize contributes at the present time to the world around us, because the world is not in a natural state like it would have been originally when we were first created, shall we say. And we are supposed to be all connected. Okay, I'll just make sure while I'm here I've got the sound up, because it wouldn't be the first time that the sound has been wrong or something. Okay, so that was the start. Now the title was Life for Ruth and Archon Life. That was the title. I'll get back to that in a second. I'm sorry once again if I ramble and go all over the place. You know, I would have limited viewers for this reason, and I realise this, and that's okay, because it's too hard for me under present circumstances to have a script. In fact, I'll just give an example of something and you can make of it what you will. I had a pile of papers, like just paper, and I put a note on it for this video so that I would have something to speak about, okay? And I just wrote a few words on the top and I left it there. And when I get up, it's all over the floor, you know, like, and I can't even find the actual one that was on the top with the little note. And, you know, if I look around the house, there's no window open. The door hasn't been opened. There's a door stopper pushed up against it, which means that I would see if someone had come in, etc. You know, now I'm sort of smiling about this, but at the same time, you know, I don't think, trying to bring that closer, I'm not very good at this, so unprofessional in every way, I'm sorry, but make of that what you will. Now, this was like I've said before, okay, even though we are spiritual beings in this world and we contribute to the creation of it with our thinking and our feelings and our emotions, actually creating what is around us, but we're unaware of this. Most of us are anyway, and even if you are, you have very little actual control over it, in the sense that we are natural beings, if you want to look at it that way. Now, this is probably not technically correct what I'm saying. In fact, most of what I'm saying will not, you know, you could find 1,000 flaws with it. And that is true. So I talk from a very basic point of view. I don't have all the details, and that's for you to fill in or other people to make of it what you will. You know, take this as a total fantasy realm if you want to look at it that way. You're coming into a fantasy realm in the sense, not everybody, but in the sense that how I would have normally thought up to not very long ago and how I now see things are like two different worlds. So coming into this world now is leaving reality behind, really, or at least the reality that I knew and that most people would experience. the concrete world in a way, and yet we're still in the concrete world. And this is what I was trying to say, is that although we are natural spiritual beings, if you want to look at it that way, and almost like creating stuff together, but we're unaware of it, our very vibration between one another and the impact on the world, because everything is frequency and vibration, as I've said before, and this is just a basics. I didn't make this up. This is what, is established. We're affecting the world around us and interacting with this vibration with other human beings in particular, all the time. And so that is contributing to creating what this world is around us. But even though this is the case, we are not in a natural world to where just our very thinking and our very feelings and our very vibration and frequency is creating this world. No, this is not our world. We are in a world that is created indirectly by a God entity. There are many gods, evidently. By that I mean many potential gods. There are many potential gods for this world, but there is only one God that can rule at a given time, and there is only one God entity that rules at this time, therefore, I would assume. Okay? This is all, look, whether I believe it to be true, whether it is fantasy, you're entering into a fantasy if you are engaging in this conversation with me. It's a conversation, okay? That's how I look at it. If anyone's listening, there are evidently some people listening now, a few. It's a conversation, and it's a fantasy conversation in the sense that it's not an established fact for most people, and may or may not be real for you or for, look, there would have to be a truth and a real reality behind everything. But it's like if you go to the movies, okay? I say if I go to the movies, I enter into that fantasy, and while I'm in that fantasy, it is real. Also, I personally think that the movies are real. I personally think they represent the true reality, or at least not so much the true reality, that they represent the true reality in the sense that what I see around me, right, is the true reality that I have contributed to creating with others, mainly indirectly and without intention, because always at a low frequency, as I've said, because this world is a low frequency world. If it was a high frequency world, we would probably have a different world, I would imagine. This is all fantasy, okay? This is all fantasy. But I believe in fantasy. I had fairy tale books when I was a child. I read Alice Through the Looking Glass, Alice in Wonderland. I believe everything is a wonderland. Everything is through the looking glass. Everything is a fairy tale because it is real. Fairy tales are real. Everything that you think is not real is real. Everything that you think is not possible is possible. Everything that you think is an illusion or coincidence, where you occasionally feel feel that there's something wrong, or that there's more than what you can see. You know how most of our lives, at certain points, just occasionally, you'll look out, maybe look out at the night sky and see a million flickering lights. I can remember doing this when I was younger and seeing a million flickering lights and feeling very alone. And feeling very alone and isolated to see so many millions of lights, all the lights of all the houses in the dark sky. And then to look up and see the stars up twinkling up above as well. And to feel very alone and very small. And to feel that there's something still wrong and that there's something there and you don't know what it is. You know, that sort of thing. That's how I occasionally would have felt. And I've no doubt that others feel these things too at times, but they're fleeting moments. But that feeling of smallness and isolation is also probably a great illusion, I would imagine now. This is what I would say. And that's why we don't have any sense that we have any input into this world unless we play in the world as a real world. In other words, I'm not putting this very well once again. In other words, unless we're really participating in the physical real world, and actually having an input in the systems, shall we say, in the things, the physical things that are there for us, we actually feel very isolated and like nothing. Whereas in reality, we are creating reality indirectly in an artificial world, in a fake world, in a physical world that is largely constructed through our mental way of perceiving it, how we are told we're supposed to see it, and how we think that everyone else sees it. And because we're connected to other people mentally, which we should be, and if they're perceiving the world a certain way and they're doing things in the real world that are, like they might be doing certain activities that get them the attention, they're successful in some way in this world, we are connected to that, so we follow all that. And so then if we're not successful in the real world at a physical level, we feel even more isolated and we feel like failures and like nothing. This is all the construct of the Archon world, you could say. The Archon God. This is the construct so that he plays with us. He plays with us like some people play with animals, but in a naughty way. Because he plays at our expense in a way, because he plays negatively with us. He plays us mentally in every way, but he plays us like we are an animal that he has no regard for. But that also depends on, your position in this world. If you're not serving and actually doing something for the God entity, then you will be played like a toy. And yes, every little thing that goes wrong will be him toying with you mentally and physically and and making you feel pathetical. You know, it's very hard to explain, but it is like that because that is just how it works. But I've gone off the track. I'm terribly sorry. Um, but like I say, there are many gods, and only one can rule. Only one does rule or has control over this earth, which was a natural domain, which we are natural beings. Correct, real human beings are more natural beings, and they were in a natural world. This world is now not natural. It is now not under our mind or our thought control like it was originally. It is now under the Archon God's control, totally. He's a technological God, as I've said before. He likes everything artificial, but he likes to play with humans who are natural in his artificial constructed world. And so now we're playing in his world, but we're playing against things that we can't really understand and don't have as much control over. Like we do not have any control over technology, okay? Our thinking, I think, and this is purely, like I say, coming into Alice in Wonderland, Alice Through the Looking Glass. And I could be wrong about some of these points in the sense that because we are kept in the dark, because we are at very limited awareness of our abilities or what we are or what we can create and what we are creating. Our actual awareness of our actual selves is, you know, probably, I don't know what percent, 5% maybe. So, you know, like I am now, I'm really floundering because we are supposed to be creating in a natural world. And we're supposed to be aware of ourselves and what we are creating and what vibration we are at. And we should always be at a high vibration, you see, too. This is what I would imagine. Because if we were not in an Archon environment, we would be at a high frequency. But the Archon environment is artificial and negative and directs us and interferes with our natural flow. We're not anymore, as I think we, you know, if you want to take it to the fantasy realm of going back to the beginning, whether you want to say a Garden of Eden, these are all just titles. So anything that I say, don't take it literally. You can if you want to. You can if you want to. If you are sure that you are on the right track along a certain line. You know, like some people might be religious along certain lines. Well, you know, it's not for me to sway them or to say that could well be very correct. I don't know. I don't discuss those sorts of things. And, you know, I see this whole world as controlled and operated by the one entity. So therefore, everything that is in this constructed world is operated by that entity. So therefore, if someone speaks to me about different denominations or different things, you know, they would have to be one and the same, because, you know, there's no getting around that basic core idea, the same as with the human being, what they are. So all these things come down to, for me, they come down to basics. But, you know, that's a matter of whether you are going to believe the basics. If someone else has a totally basic idea about what they are and about what the world is, or they believe the construct that's around them, you know, then they're going to be coming from a totally different standpoint. And there's probably not much point in them having the conversation with me, um, because I can't go back to looking at the world that way. I might even like to. It was more comfortable, um, you know, to be in a world that um, is very, where you can see that other humans are in a different world to you. They're right next to you and they're around you, but their mindset and their actions, because they're controlled by the God entity mentally. So therefore, their actions reflect that. And therefore, they will be operating negatively. And you cannot actually communicate with them. So this is, so even though you are sending thoughts out to them, because we're all connected still with the thinking, I would think, okay? How strong that is now, I do not know, because of technology, because the technology is an interference of that natural wavelength. Work it out yourself. If I'm sending, if you enter into my fantasy world, okay, where human beings have a natural spiritual connection where their thinking goes from one to the other, just naturally. My thought should naturally go to another human being, okay? But if there is technology through the air, that may well interfere with that. I'm not sure how much interference takes place, how much of the thoughts are manipulated by the system, by the technology around us. I do know that our minds are influenced and are controlled and are manipulated and maneuvered by the way we think about the world. And that's just common sense, because I know how I thought before, and I know how other people think because I see it, and also it's around us. They tell us our communication. I only know what's going on around me, apart from just my own eyes, which in the past you tend to believe more what you are told about something as opposed to what you see with your own eyes. I now prefer, and this is just my own view and what I try to do, although I have to admit I'm not liking what I see, to use your own eyes, your own thinking, as opposed to what you get from someone else or other people around you or the world or the technological information. But to do this clearly in this world is now impossible. It's impossible to even be aware of it. You can be aware of being, that you're going to be hit by a thunderbolt, as I am, but it's not going to stop you getting hit by it. You might even know where it's coming from. You might even know who's doing it, but it's still not going to prevent that from happening. I've digressed and went all over the place, and I'm sorry. I wasn't even going to talk about all this. I've gone. The title of the video was Life for Ruth. and Archon life. The title of the video is Life for Ruth. Oh, before I go, I'm sorry, just before I go on to it, Life for Ruth is the name of a movie, okay? If you're interested, just before I go on, Life for Ruth is a movie. It was a movie, an old movie. In my fantasy world, the movies are just as real as the reality around me, okay? This is what I'm saying. This is the fantasy world. If you want to come into, I'm actually telling you, if you want to listen to me or have a conversation with me, you're entering into a fantasy world. And it's a dark world too, because the world is dark, because we are at negative low frequency, so therefore to enter into that fantasy is a darker world. It shouldn't be, or it doesn't have to be, but it is. It's largely the product of what we create and what is created around us. Like I've said before, if your environment is bad, then your frequency will be bad, and therefore your thinking will be bad, and your feeling will be bad, and therefore you will contribute to creating a bad environment, a bad world, whatever you like. It can't be helped, because it takes a very superior being to be of this world, in this world, but not of this world. I will use sayings and quotes and things that come to me that may come from various sources from time to time. They are not showing any affiliation to any particular denominations or individuals, but look, to me, I'm very ignorant. I have very limited knowledge on everything around me to an extent, and yes, this will be what they will call sound bites now. And I am big on sound bites. I realise this now. I didn't even know there was such a word. In other words, if I hear something that rings true to me, makes sense, I would use it. Doesn't mean that's my religion, shall we say, or that's my true belief on everything. It's just using anything that is in this world that is there, whether it's a saying, a quote, I will use it if it makes sense to me at this time. Okay? That's all I can offer you. Nothing more than that. Anyway, I've went off the track. I've lost my thought again. See, this is what happens. You've got to keep concentrating. I can't emphasize this enough. This is the problem with the world too. I'll say this again too. This is so important. At least I believe it is. Even if you enter into the dark fantasy world and you think you know everything, you must keep your concentration, I believe. You can't afford to be sidetracked. That was the point of the thing before that I was saying. You can't afford to be sidetracked by any external influence. Everything that is external is of the matrix of the Archon God entity. Only what is internal is really yours, and even that is not a secret. It's not your private thinking, it's not your private thoughts. There's no privacy. So the God entity knows everything that's going on, every single thought, every single move. So and this is a physical fact as well as a psychological fact in today's world. In the past, it was more of a mental psychological fact, in the sense that, you know, the beings have always been here. But now we live in a totally physical construct that we have very little control over. In other words, I said this before, in the past, I think that we were and this is true even of my own life, like when I was younger, you were manipulated mentally to, for you you're manipulated mentally so that you will act a certain way, so that you'll behave a certain way, so that your life will go a certain way. But, there wasn't quite as much actual physical restraint, shall we say. And by that I mean that there was not technology, or the technology was very limited. No, the technology did not affect us, because we didn't have technology on this actual physical earth. We didn't have actual physical technology on the physical earth that we were actually interacting with. It was always there, but behind the curtain, because this is Alice in Wonderland. This is Alice through the looking glass. We are on this side of the looking glass, you could say. And very few, like Alice, go through the looking glass to see what's on the other side, to see the other technology, the vast technology, the technology of the God entity. But what I am trying to say, as I've said before, is that even though there is there is this Alice through the looking glass. Let's say I'm Alice, okay? I'm on this side of the looking glass. The looking glass is here, there's another side. And I never venture through the looking glass. No humans do. Most humans don't, okay? Most of us don't. Some probably do. Those that are more in contact with the God entity. Those that allow the God entity to come into them, in a way, I should say. I don't understand this. I'm talking through my hat, okay? But if you want to come into my fantasy world and talk through the hat and go into that, then that's okay, and that's good. That's what we're doing here. It's a fantasy world. It's for you to decide how much is fantasy, whether you want to believe that fantasy or whether you want to believe some of it, whether you want to dismiss it, whether you just want to use it as, like most people do when they're watching a horror movie. They say, oh, that was chilly, that was frightening, but it was only a movie. I can go back to my Alice on this side of the looking glass now and become real again, a real human being that's living in the world that I see around me. It's actually not that great, even what you see around you these days, I would imagine, but it still seems relatively safe to most people because, they believe that they have some control over it. In reality, of course, they should, in the fantasy world of that we have the ability and are actually creating it by our frequency, vibration, and our thinking and our feelings, etc. We actually have, but most human beings believe that they control it by the real world. If someone comes and physically comes into my space, that is how they control me. That is how they believe that. They don't think, everything that people do, they think they do it physically. They don't think that they do it mentally and by thinking and by thoughts, positive and negative thoughts, etc. They don't think that. But the entities and their minions, their followers, their believers, all different sorts, I would imagine, in this fantasy world. From what I can gather, even though the God entity has many followers, many disciples, many believers, They all don't really, I don't think they all actually believe the same thing. The God entity is a mastermind and very clever, naturally, and he knows the spiritual realm and he understands what humans are, and he knows that you can use that thinking and the human's abilities for positive or negative. Now, anyway, I've rambled off once again. I wish that I could keep it in the right frame. Oh, this is negative, you see. Oh, and I'm sweating everywhere. This is the physical, you see. This is the stress of it. And this should not be like it. Today I was going to say I shall make a video and be calm and relaxed and not get stressed about it and not try to put too much into it, because I get confused if I don't keep on track. And see, I've got confused now because I'm having a conversation, but I'm really making a video. It's too hard. If you're making a video, you should just be making points. But I don't want to do that because I am actually frightened to be too direct anyway, because one, they're not facts for most people, so it has to be a fantasy realm. I've said before, the movies have all the reality, I think. I think if you enter into, look, it's all a fantasy. It's all not real now. This is in comparison to this being, yeah, I'll get back to Alan's Through the Looking Glass. And I'm making this up too because I can't even remember that book. But it doesn't matter. I'm Alice. I'm on the side. There's the looking glass in the center. You step through the looking glass and you see the other reality. How your world really works. How you really work. You see it from the God entity's point of view because he is on the other side of the looking glass. He's like, yeah, like in The Wizard of Oz, you know, where they're in the land of Oz and it's all magical and all fantasy, yes. And then they, I think, as memory serves me, they pull the curtain and they see the man working all the controls for this magical world. He's not too happy when they see this because, you know, he's running that whole thing and he doesn't want Dorothy and the other beings that are in it to understand or to see how the whole thing works, because then it's no longer a fantasy. Then it's no longer able to keep that fantasy going for Dorothy and the other beings. You know what I'm saying? Once you go through the looking glass and you see how it all works, if we could only do that, then, and it would be a shock, of course. This is the thing, it would be a shock because it's not like, I don't think it would be like The Wizard of Oz where they pull the curtain and it's just a man pulling a few levers. It would be more complicated than that and more vast, but at the same time, it's still essentially that idea that they see all and we only see, on this side of the looking glass, we only see a minuscule amount of what is our reality and how we operate in it and what our true position in it might even be. In other words, because we are spiritual beings and our thought creates reality and we're all connected and everything's frequency and vibration, and we give that off with our thoughts and our feelings and create and make the world around us. See, the thoughts, I'm being bombarded here. I cannot keep on track. The God entity controls all this. He sees the whole thing. So he has the upper hand. The human being, even if the human being, let's just put it in this scenario, another fantasy scenario. Supposing there was little human beings, right? That, you know, they're creating the reality with their thinking. But because they're only seeing that minuscule amount of the reality, they're in themselves, they feel like nothing almost. And in some cases, for all practical purposes, they are being manipulated and bamboozled and used so much that they actually have no real conscious ability of their true position in this earth at all. And it wouldn't matter if you had, like, it wouldn't matter, you know, like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz had the power all along, I think. If memory serves me correct, she had the magical shoes. She could have she could have got away from it any time. She wasn't really a victim, but she thought she was, because she didn't know her own position. She hadn't went through the looking glass or pulled the curtain back at that stage to see what was going on. So she was like a victim and powerless, whereas all along she had the power in the red shoes or something like that. Doesn't matter whether I got this right or not. I'm saying that she did have the power to get herself out of the situation and to manipulate things, but instead it was the God entity behind the curtain, the same as the God entity that rules this world, that, you know, had the upper hand, because he's seeing the whole thing and he's controlling the whole thing, whereas she has as much power in a way as any other entities, but because she's not aware of the whole picture and hasn't went through the looking glass to see what's on the other side, to see that she actually is part of the operation of the earth, and that actually she is one of the bigger parts, because it's the human being that really controls the world, but they're not controlling it at all because they are on the other side of the looking glass. So therefore, they are merely manipulated and maneuvered by the world around them, by the God entity, by the minions also that operate, other human beings that operate for the God and that are also manipulated by the God, no doubt. You know, you could worship a God, but you know, but that does not mean that because you worship that he will not play you as much as he plays the animals like myself that are his toys that he has no regard for. In other words, the ones that don't serve him, or that for whatever reason, and that he sees as an animal that he can play with in a negative way if it amuses. Because, you know, spiritual beings don't normally probably behave like that, I wouldn't think. But as you go away from being spiritual, I would think that you become more negative, more disregardful of actual life apart from your own. So therefore, the life around you is only to serve you and to amuse you. So it's kind of like that, if you follow. But anyway, sorry about this, I'm not doing it well again, very sorry. The title of the video was Life for Ruth. this was going to be a simple video today. It's about, look, it's Life for Ruth is a movie, okay? Now, this is an old movie, a very old movie, made in the early 60s, black and white. If you want to look it up and watch it, I'm sure you could get it for nothing, because a movie like that was a B-type movie in its day anyway, with what you'd call B actors, not an expensive production. But the idea behind it was very interesting. Now, you know, I could talk about 1,000 movies, and I would like to. And most of your newer movies would probably show you much more the reality of what I think this so-called real world is much more like. In other words, the fantasy is much more the reality, but it is on the other side of the looking glass, right? Okay? And most of us can't go through that looking glass. Most of us don't even want to, probably, either, because in many ways it is terrifying. And the reason it's terrifying is mainly because, one, it's just like going from total black to white. It's so extreme. Whereas if we had been conditioned from the day we're born, aware of ourselves, aware of a different, it's a bit like, how should I say? It's a bit like this, right? You know how we're frightened of ghosts? And like I say, all the movies, we're frightened of ghosts, we're frightened of vampires, we're frightened of haunted houses, we're frightened of monsters, we're frightened of the unknown, because that's right, because it is unknown. You know, and it'd be like this. I was only thinking this the other day, and no doubt you're thinking I'm stupid, and look, it sounds stupid, and there is a certain stupidity to it, but you know how we have like different animals on this earth, right? Now, you know, like there's cats in the street, right? Now, if I'd never seen a cat before, I might well be frightened of a cat. Some people actually, strangely enough, are, which is interesting. But you know how we're frightened of some things? We're frightened of spiders and all these other things, whereas other animals and things we find very friendly, and when we're used to them and we're not frightened of them. So it's kind of like that, I think, is that if I had never seen a cat before and then I saw one, I would be terrified. And yet the cat would not really be something that I should be terrified of. But if I hadn't seen one before, it would just be so strange. It would be unfamiliar. And this is like we are in this world, is that the things that we don't see, if we did see them, we'd be terrified because we're not familiar with them. They would appear alien to us. And no doubt they would be. And so we would be frightened. And this is why even some people do not even try to go through the looking glass for that reason, and you can't blame them. And I would have to say that I have not been right through the looking glass, but I've had a tiny peek. Okay, look at it that way. And it wasn't through choice. See, it should be choice. People should want to see through the looking glass. They should want to see the whole picture, because it's the only thing that can give them a way to actually have any control over this world or their environment. And also it is it's essential for them, otherwise they'll be tricked into living and being taken down into a negative reality, I would think. Now, I haven't gone into details and I've gone off the track again, and I'm sorry, but you see what I'm trying to say is that even with myself, like I was forced to take a peek. Forced. By that I mean I didn't choose to, and that was for other reasons, because as I've said before, the negative things will be shown to you if there is a fear by the God entity, shall we say, and his many followers, disciples. They don't want to lose their reality. So it's either going to be our reality or their reality. All this is a fantasy, you see. All this is a fantasy. It's going to be either my reality or their reality, your reality or their reality. But it will be their reality until you are able to peek through the looking glass. Because while you're on this side of the looking glass, even unless you are someone who's just naturally, this is what I said before, naturally at a high vibration, and naturally just all positive, dare I say, a highly evolved human being that doesn't see anything negative in the world, even though there is negative right in front of you. That is the secret, I think. If there is a secret, and it's not a secret, but because everything is frequency and vibration, this just come to me now, it has to be that if you are someone, and most people are not possible to be this, and how could you be? If you are someone who only sees positive, only sees something good, only feels something good, only feels positive, only feels, dare I say, love, despite hate or negative or aggressiveness being all around you, then you are that being that will be able to create a positive environment. But it won't kind of matter, because it will be that you will be seeing a positive environment anyway. Now, who can do this? You are, I ask you, who could do this? That's why I think it's important that we go through the looking glass. Because there are very few individuals that would be able to be positive and only give out positive and love and a positive vibration, a positive frequency, and think positive when everything around them is being pushed around them negative. More so if, this is essential for the God entity to keep it at the same frequency in order that his reality stays the same. And those that like that reality, they want that vibration and that world and that frequency to stay that way. So naturally they're going to then, unless you're already at that high vibration, and how you would get there, I do not know. You see what I'm trying to say? It has to be a catch-22. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm not putting it very well. It's simple in a way, but naturally then they're going to bring the environment even more down on the individual or the human being or the spiritual being or whatever that is going to change that vibration. Because they would be worried that it would spread. They don't really care if one human being has a high frequency or a high vibration, or is happy, in other words, provided that human being was totally isolated. But you see, no human beings really are isolated, because if in light of the basic thing that we're all connected, that's not possible, you see. So therefore, that is why the God entity then, and his minions and his disciples and even other spiritual human beings, can be turned against other spiritual human beings in this world. They can be tricked. They can be manipulated mentally. This world is such a trick world that, and it is controlled by such a mastermind God entity that, you could have truth, as I've said, can be used for bad in this world. See, what I'm trying to say is we have to get through that looking glass and see the truth and the real thing. But until you get really and see the whole truth and are able to realize that you are in a fantasy world, assuming that we are, okay, then even truth will be used in this world to create negative. That's how it works. Because in order to get us, particularly, it's easy to, you don't have to convince people who are on the dark side to be dark. You don't have to convince negative people who are negative to do negative. But how do you get spiritual human beings who really want to be positive and who would naturally, in their normal state, please help me, the words, they don't come, I'm no good at this, were not influenced or not affected by the negative world around them and were just left to themselves, they would just naturally be good. They would just naturally only want to create a good world. So how do you get a spiritual good, so-called good, positive human being to do something negative? You have to convince that spiritual good human being that of some truth, and it may even be a bit of truth, it may even be a truth, in other words, you have to use something good or some truth to a spiritual human being to then get them to turn against, say, another spiritual human being, which is negative. But they won't know that because, like, if someone said, for instance, to someone said something about me, supposing I'm a spiritual human being, okay? I do hope I am, but okay, because we're taking this from a fantasy point of view all the time. We have to in these videos, okay? We have to. I'm a spiritual human being, someone else is a spiritual human being. They tell a spiritual human being that I am not a spiritual human being, that I am a negative human being, that I have done this or that or whatever, then that spiritual human being is going to want to get rid of me in a way, because they will see me as negative and destructive, and because they are actually quite a spiritual human being and good, they don't want that in the world, you see. And this is how that's how the God entity or the minions or other people that are negative work to convince basically even the spiritual human beings to create a negative reality or to do something negative or to get rid of high frequency or human beings that are contributing to changing the frequency of the world. I'm not putting this right. Okay, so, oh dear. So this is pretty much how it works then. Because in this fantasy world, in the real world, we assume in the fantasy world anything goes. In the fantasy world, they're all different beings. In the fantasy world, even human beings are different. In the fantasy world, not all human beings are spiritual human beings. Not all human beings are either deliberately or consciously creating a positive reality. Some deliberately create a negative reality due to their makeup, due to their influence over their life, due to the negative surroundings, etc., etc. So what I'm saying is that, but in the real world, in the so-called real world, we assume that everyone is a human being. Just good or bad, that's basically it. Everything is quite simple in the so-called real world, whereas in the fantasy world, everything is infinitely more complicated. And that is only because in the real world is like that much of reality. In a funny kind of way, you could say that really everything is really reality, but we only see that much of reality. We see the real reality. What we call the real world is that much of reality, whereas there's really much, much, much more. We see like 5% of reality, of the real reality, but we think that is the whole reality because we're in the box, we're in the bubble, we're it's a bubble of the mind really, as much as a physical bubble. I think I said before in another video that it is, we are cut off, you could say, from the, could you say the cosmos? I don't know. Other realms. See, I don't know all these things because I'm cut off too. I only get glimpses. But, and when I say 5%, for all I know, it might be less than 5%, but I know it's not very big. And like I said before, it'd be like if I saw an animal for the first time. If I saw a cat for the first time, I'd probably think it was some sort of monster, okay? Because I would never have, like if you see something you haven't seen before, your immediate reaction is fear. Humans are very much conditioned. We are all very much conditioned with fear. I know that myself. It's all fear. And that's what we are conditioned with. We are in a world of fear. If we did not have any fear, human beings, if they just did not have any fear, I actually think that even if myself, if I had no fear, then very little, then I think probably we would probably all just automatically have a high frequency, strangely enough, because fear is definitely the key, I would say, in my own life and even now. Like knowing even some truths and even knowing that you should have more control over your environment still doesn't stop the fear, because to say that a bullet is coming at me right now, say, like in the movie The Matrix, yeah, that's a good example. Someone is firing a bullet at me right now, right? And this does happen too, by the way, but not in that direct term, but it could happen. In fact, it does and will happen only if it is directed by the matrix, by the God entity's matrix. But what I'm saying is that a bullet could be fired at me right now, right? It could be. I've lost my train of thought, you see. But like in the matrix, that bullet comes and you believe in that bullet. You believe that bullet will kill you. You have been told that the bullet will and can kill you. But what if you'd never been told that a bullet could kill you? What if you didn't believe that the bullet could kill you? And what if you believed that you could control that bullet? You see. Then it would be a different scenario. What if you didn't have any fear of that bullet at all? It's the fear of being killed, the fear of the bullet. Without the fear, it doesn't matter either way. And it's quite likely that the bullet could be powerless without the fear. I don't know. Fantasy world again. Okay. I've gone off track and I don't know why I go off track and go on to all these things. I was going to talk about time's running out, literally too, I think. There again, time is very much something, oh, see, that just come to me now. I'm going to go back onto the movie, but time is another thing that basically does defeat us. The idea of time, the fear of time. There again, fear. The fear of tomorrow. If we had no fear of tomorrow, no fear of what we're told, no fear of what's around us, you know, it would be a different thing. It's all about fear. This world feeds the Archon God, I think, feeds off fear incredibly. This is what I have been informed of, and this is what I know, because this is what happens in our reality, in our limited reality even. And because we are in the dark and everything is unknown, that breeds even more fear. Because that's why I say I think that we have to go through the looking glass, because then at least we know how. If all of us knew what was going on, see, there again, it's no good one person just raising the vibration. We have to all go through the looking glass, because the minute we all see it, then even if we were in fear a second before, that would vanish, I would imagine, because then we would see how everything worked, and we would see that we are all connected, and we would know that combined we don't have to fear even what's behind the curtain or what is through the looking glass. But when you do it alone and you realise that no one else is seeing it, then you let the matrix and the God entity pretty much get to you, because you feel powerless. You feel that, there's very few human beings, unless they are at very high frequency, that's going to say, I'm going to take on the whole world or the matrix. In other words, even if they don't like the matrix and they think it's negative, they want to make it more positive. And they know how it's all being manoeuvred, and they know how it's all being orchestrated, and they can see how it's all working, but no one else can see it. So they just they look stupid, really, to be honest, and they're going to have those same people that should be working with them working against them, because they're not going to have any allies or any. The God entity has many allies. The God entity has many disciples. The God entity has many followers. The God entity has many believers, even, if you like, because, you know, these are, it's all a question of whether you believe in whether that is a good thing. Now, whether you're seeing the whole picture or not is another thing. It's all a fantasy thing. To me, it's a dark fantasy. Very dark fantasy. Very dark reality, and and one that seems very hard to to change. You know, and it's what I am saying, as I've said before, is that regardless of all of this, the human beings, because this is why I have come to that idea, or that in agreement with others, even, shall we say, or at least at a very little level, a smaller level, even though it seems all fantasy, I agree that humans must be spiritual beings and must have more influence on the environment at a subconscious level, but not at a conscious level, because we're not aware of it and because we don't have full control over it, and our environment isn't our own anymore. But just the fact that we are presented with the truth, as I've said before, because this is what struck me, as I've said before in other videos, this is what struck me, is you don't show the truth to a subordinate or or something that is less than you, unless you have to. If you are the God entity and you have full control over the domain, and you have most of the beings in your domain under your control and at your service and willingly serving you, more or less, there's no reason that you would be presenting the truth to other beings that you have no contact with or no real affinity with, and you don't act, you actually would prefer it if they weren't there. So why are you obliged to show them the truth, whether it be directly or indirectly? To me, that seems like, if you're going to commit a murder, you're not going to show that person in advance how their demise is going to happen. But if you can show it to them in a way where they don't recognize it as happening to them or not a possibility, then you have shown them the truth, because you're obliged to for some reason, because that person is somehow special. You know, then, you know, you've kind of technically not transgressed the law, shall we say, almost. You know, because you've used your the God entity has used his abilities to you know, obey the law, but at the same time, hopefully, not show the human being, you know, that he has got the murder plan, shall we say. You know, and because he is super genius and super intelligent and has super resources available to him, you know, he can accomplish this. But if that human being was not special, there would be no reason in the world why he would have to do that, because it would take time on his part. He himself probably would not feel obliged to do it, because he would have disdain for that human being anyway. But if it is a kind of law to where his actual reality could be taken from him in some way if he transgresses, so he has to still play within some rules too, even though it's basically his world and his creation, shall we say. I'm not putting this very well. In other words, it's a bit like, I suppose common sense would be that this earth is a part of a bigger picture, but this earth, this smaller picture, is totally under a particular god's control and dominion. But, there could be like universal laws that cover everything, or that type of thing. So even though on this earth he can make any rules he wants, provided he can get the spiritual human beings that are here to agree to it. But he can't do it without their agreement. But as he pretty much has full control, and as most human beings worship him anyway, if you think something is your God, you are not going to question. Most human beings will not question their God. Once they believe in a God, they usually will not question their God, because they're like, how could I question a God? That is my God. And that makes sense too, doesn't it? But so that makes sense. But they might not actually sort of know that it is their God of this earth, but the earth is still part of a bigger picture, and that God may or may not have dominion over the whole. But to be quite honest, in this fantasy realm that I have been talking about, right? And this is fantasy too. If you think it's fantasy, and this is just some people's idea, okay? So I just put these ideas that come to me from other sources, throw them together, make of them what you will. It's all a fantasy, okay? But, like I say, I believe in fantasy. I was a child who, when I read the fairy tales, I didn't put the book down and say that is a fairy tale. When I read Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, I was like, that is a true story. So that's where I'm coming from, okay? So this is it. So it's whether you believe a so-called fantasy, whether you think it's possible, whether you think it's true, whether you think it's partly true. Certainly there would have to be at least part truths, even to some fantasies, I would think. But, there again, you could dismiss the whole thing if that is what you think. And then you will go back, I suppose, like they say in that Matrix movie, then you go back to the blue pill world, where you go back to your comfortable, limited life, where you feel safe, even though you may not be safe, because if you haven't been through that looking glass, that reality is still there. That 95% that you're not seeing, and it may be more or less than that too. There again, I would not have a clue, so don't quote me on any single thing that I say, because I don't know. It's purely a guess, but I do know that there is much more, or at least I'm speculating there's much more in this fantasy scenario. Okay. Gone off again now. Too many words. Trying to explain everything in too many details, get too caught up. Need to keep it basic. But yeah, I've gone off. I've lost track of it. A lot of interference. This is what I say. We're not in a natural state. There's not this slowing down of thinking that we must, where we concentrate. Even if you are living, I would say, even if you don't want to be like me, where you believe the fairy tales and you have already peeked through the looking glass a bit. Even if you are in totally limited reality, where you feel comfortable and you think that it's just this little world, nothing is particularly, there's no one behind the curtain, There's no looking glass. What is on this side of the looking glass, this reality, is all there is. There is no looking glass to where you go through onto the other side and see the huge reality. There's if you believe, even if you believe, or you are like like in the Matrix, the blue pill, where you want to go back to the fake world and not see the Matrix, etc. I still think that this is just what I would say. This is just advice, really. And I certainly wish I could apply it to myself, because I think that you still have to live in this matrix. You still have to live in this real world while you're here. No doubt about that. You know, it's still real because it's created around you. And, you know, until I don't know how we do it. I don't know how you don't see the bullet. I don't know how you don't have the fear of the bullet. But I suppose if you knew that you weren't really going to die, and you knew that for a fact, then you wouldn't fear the bullet coming at you, see? I guess that's how it would be. But as most people have not been to the other side, shall we say, and most people are conditioned that we live limited lives, and we don't have any memory of anything before or after or in between, and we have, you know, and we don't even know most of what's going on if you look at it that way. How could you not have the fear of the bullet, you see? You know, I'm saying that maybe the bullet is imaginary, and that maybe the bullet can be stopped by the thinking. But this conditioning of this world is very great. This Archon God entity that has dominion over the world has took over our minds to such an extent. You know, like it's taken from the day you're born, and that becomes your reality. And to dismiss that, especially when you get to an older age where that's been your whole reality, is very hard. In fact, it's almost impossible, even if you see glimpses and know it to then, you know, you believe the fantasy, shall we say, but at the same time, you still believe the real world too. It's, yes, I don't think I've put this very well, but what I was saying, my advice was, getting back to that, this is just advice, really. Even if you believe just totally what's in front of you, and you believe everything that's around you, and you don't believe there's any mastermind behind it, you don't believe there's any God. Supposing you don't believe there's any God at all, you don't believe there's any control systems, you don't even believe that humans have any master plans or any ideas or that they serve any or believe in anything, even though I think that would be hard pressed these days to actually not believe that, because I think that you would have to say most people do believe in something, most people serve something, and most people are operating to better themselves in this physical domain even. You know, like a lot of people, like most people want, because they believe so much in this physical world, they want power, they want money, they want to be recognized, they want to feel that they are not isolated and alone in this huge world full of so many people. But in reality, this I think is the trick of it. Personally, if they really saw behind the curtain or through the looking glass, they wouldn't feel like this. They would feel that even though they're just one little limited human being, that they actually do have a great input. And this also will depend on the numbers. I'm not going to go there. You know, like if you go on numbers and say, oh, well, there's 7 billion of spiritual human beings. But if that was not the true number, and either way, there couldn't possibly be 7 billion spiritual human beings. You only have to look at the world, because if there was 7 billion spiritual human beings, the world would be a lot different place. It would have to be. So I suppose common sense would have to tell us that definitely it is operated or at least manipulated, or governed, controlled, something by darker forces. That would be common sense, even if the human beings themselves just are more negative and more physical and more non-spiritual and more, more out for power, money, and pretty much not caring about the other billions or what, you know what I mean? That's just common sense. So even at a basic realistic level, that would. I'm not putting this very well again. I'm so sorry, oh dear. But either way, my advice is that even if you are at the lowest level, and there's nothing wrong with that, if you're getting by and you're not being hit by too much negativity and you don't feel too bad, you know, all I can say is just take it very slow. Concentrate. Concentrate on what you're doing. Don't be too taken in by too much of what's around you, even if you believe even in the physical, but concentrate on the physical at a very concentrated level. In other words, whatever you're doing, concentrate on it and try to concentrate on it and enjoy it. In other words, at least live. I guess that's what I'm saying, because I think that most of us are not living. Like, I know myself, it's like a day goes by and you do feel that you're actually not living. And you actually aren't, because your mind is on tomorrow or on fear or on always trying to do too much. You're not living in the moment. Living is when you are in the moment, concentrating on it and enjoying it, I would think. And as I've been led to believe that time is a bit of an illusion anyway, and that time is part of our trap, time creates fear too, and time is not really real, because everything is just being created in the moment, if you look at it that way. The future is really this very second, because everything that a human being does this very second is the future. Now, that's something that most of us can't comprehend, and even I can't comprehend, but that's actually probably the reality. And if we did concentrate totally on the present and make that present a positive thing, then we would have no reason to fear the future, because the future, past, present, and future, they would all be fine. Even when you look back, that's another thing too. Like, most of us are stuck very much in the past. We all are. And I have seen other people that are almost totally living in the past. Their very actions in the present are really dictated by the past. Their unpleasantness from the past, their fear of the past, the things that have happened in the past haunt them. They can't let go of it. It's a bit like, you see that all the time, where you feel people have wronged you in the past and you can't let go of it. You're like, I wish that hadn't happened. There would be, if you were a spiritual human being, as everyone is anyway, but they can't, because they actually say, hey, common sense comes in too. That's another thing too. Common sense is a good thing, but at the same time, that also can be a bad thing, because you can say, oh, look, I'm not going to let that past thing go, because that is true. You think that past hurt, and if someone's done something bad to you in the past, that by continuing it on into the present, you think that that's a good thing. You think it's almost good to be aware of it. Well, maybe it is, but to hang on to it to where it makes you negative in yourself and makes you angry and hateful, that's actually true. When you hear people, some of these people that do talk on things self-help type things, which I'm not a great believer in, but yeah, there is truth to that it really just doesn't serve you. It doesn't serve your reality. And in the long run, if you could probably go through the looking glass, you'd realise that that was all a construct of the matrix anyway. That's something that I now realise, is that if every situation is set up, if everything is part of this video game reality, which is totally contrived and set up and manipulated, from the smallest to the biggest things, then if you are holding a grudge against anyone from the past, it is foolish in a way, because how could that be that person's fault, really? They were set up too. We were all set up to create this negative reality, if you look at it. So, you could actually be holding grudges against people that are your truest loved ones in a way, because it's much more likely. And don't forget that if we go back into that fantasy realm, which I had in the previous video, of certain entities actually taking particular delight in showing that we are a very inferior species, shall we say, in the sense that we turn on one another, our own kind, and turn on those that we actually love the most. That is even more bizarre. That old saying, you always hurt the ones you love. And that is so true in this reality. That's the real tragedy of this world, is that not just that we turn against one another, but we are actually sometimes at war and at causing the most harm to those that we actually value the most. That is really strange. And you have to wonder why that happens. Because naturally the people around you are those you're going to affect the most, and those that are around you are obviously those that are in your life. So, but I've gone off track again. I apologise for not making a very good video here. I probably should delete it, really. The title of the video was Life for Ruth, a movie. A 1960s old movie. Now I'm wondering if I've got enough time even to talk about that, and that was what I was going to make a simple video this time and just concentrate on a simple movie. Now I'm exhausted, out of energy, because I've went on about this bigger picture, which obviously plagues me, to where I can no longer concentrate even on the simple things, because it's like, yes, that's the trouble, is once you start to see a bigger picture, it becomes so consuming and so negative. It should be something that should make us the better for it, because to know everything and to see what we are entitled to see, and to where it actually would empower us, you could almost say, to where we realised how special we are. And when I say we, you might say, oh, how can a huge number of people be special because we have all this individual thing? That's a bit of a deception too. That depends on which fantasy world you're in. As I've said before, and in a fantasy world, you can have different types. We've already said that we live in a world and a God entity that is different to us. A God, of course, has to be different to, would probably be different to the human. But that's only because we're conditioned to believe that. Because in reality, are we any that much different to the gods? They create, we create. It's merely that they are the dominant gods. Oh, I think someone left to think something like that, and that just come to me now. But hey, I'm getting into ridiculous here. And I don't actually want to make a video saying this, but it's all fantasy, so it's okay. But maybe this is another scenario. Maybe a God is only a God because we make him, her, a god. But at the same time, there could be some gods that do create more. I do not know, okay? I'm not going into that. But supposing you had beings, I won't say gods even, beings. The gods, there are more than one god, obviously. There are gods. Of that there can probably not be any doubt. But there are beings, okay? We are all beings. You're saying she's so stupid, how could she possibly be a being? Saying this, the obvious, that's right. But we're all beings, okay? We're all beings. And we all create. But if some beings if we decide, for whatever reason, that I'm not putting this right, I've gone off track. Either way, it comes down to that you could have a situation where all the gods are equal or all the beings are equal in the sense that they all create. But if you choose to elevate one of those beings or gods above all the others and give them a position of power and control and say that that being is more special for whatever reason, then that becomes the god. Now that god may or may not have more power than the other beings. A bit like if you're in a group of people, you might think one person is somehow more special than the others. They might have some ability or something that you're impressed by. Who knows? They might just be prettier and you might focus on them more. Look, there could be a million reasons, but essentially once you do that, then you have given that being the position of a god. And then once you do that, that being will then become more powerful, because if you put that being in that position, then you will serve that being. So then you're giving your power to that being as well. And then if it has many other minions and many other disciples, it will become more powerful just by the numbers. Even though on its own, it may or may not be, a true big creator, or I don't know. I've gone off track here and gone totally over the place, but it is fairyland, isn't it? It's all fairyland. So I think that's the thing, but some people might have better ideas on this. I'm sure some people do. And I think I better close at that point on that. Just before I go, I should have put this at the start of the video. I might do it again. We are in fantasy world. My own environment is now what I would call not real anymore, okay? So therefore, what I presume to be reality now is not. And if I go to, let's just say, okay, I go to make a telephone call, okay? I presume that if I'm going to make a telephone call, that it's a telephone line, and that if I ring, I should have no trouble getting through to the other person, the number that I ring on the other end. People are very confident on the technology, and reality tells them that most of the time it works. It has to be allowed to work because otherwise we wouldn't use it, you see. But that does not mean that if I want to make a telephone call that I am always going to be able to get through to the one that I'm talking to on the other end, okay? And this happens to me quite a lot because also, you know, sometimes I will be told that someone has rang me, but I won't hear the phone ring, but they'll say I rang. I'll say, well, I was here, but I did not hear it ring. So what I'm trying to say is that, you know, have I got bad hearing? Does the phone not work very well? So you can look for a logical reason, or you can say, hey, this is a fantasy world, and this world is not controlled by us. So, you know, if you are in my fantasy world where I say, hey, I make a telephone call, but it is up to the matrix whether that line works, not up to me. But most people would say, no, it will work, and if it doesn't work, it's because there's a fault or whatever. So it's purely a matter of which fantasy world you want to be in, whether you want to believe that it is what it is. But even if it's what it is, you still have a lot of coincidences. You still have, yes, you have the papers falling off the thing like I mentioned. Now another person would say, look, you just didn't investigate that enough. Things do not just move by themselves, and I would agree with that. But I would still say I'm mystified as to how. But if you come from a fantasy realm where you believe in fairy tales and you believe in some of the fantasy that I say, then I have no problem. I don't even have to think about it. I automatically say, I think I know what happened. But if I say that to someone else, they would not enter into that fantasy. No, they would be in another fantasy. To me, their world is fantasy. To them, my world is fantasy, you see. So that's how this world works, and it's all a matter of which fantasy you think is the real reality. And that's something that you will decide for yourself. How many coincidences or how many things have to happen or how you piece it together is purely up to yourself. And, you know, whether you want to peek through the looking glass, that's right. I mean, you know, it does take a brave person to go through the looking glass. I'm not one of those. I was forced to have a peek, so I'm not one of those. But the person that, the less fear you have, if you have less fear, you will be able to look through the looking glass. You will be able to be Alice and go through the looking glass. You will have no problem being Alice, going into Wonderland and going to the Mad Hatter's tea party and all the, I can't remember all the things that happen in the fairy tales, but you will have no problem doing things that the rest of us will be frightened to do. And if you are able to do that, that's what every human being is probably really supposed to do, I would imagine. And most human beings shouldn't have to do it with difficulty. It should have just been there from when they're born into this world anyway. But you see, that's, I think, where you know, the fantasy of this world is that we, from the day we're born, we're taken into a real fantasy and into a different fantasy world, into a concrete, artificially constructed fantasy world, to where we are told what reality is. We're told what our beliefs should be. We're told how things operate. We're not left to ourselves to find out, and we're not allowed to go through the looking glass, not unless we're willing to, you know, be very brave, shall we say the least. And also, you know, you might have to do it on your own, and you know, because if you've got friends that are in the other fantasy world, their so-called real world, they're not going to want to go through the looking glass with you. you know, they're not going to want to do that probably either. So that's another thing too. And so that's the confusion of this world, you see, because we're all supposed to be very much quite connected, and yet we're only really connected by a false reality in a way. You know what I mean? Like, I would imagine, like most people that have got friends and that are, you know, appear to be operating in our so-called society. They believe in all that, and they have their friends, and they have their groups and their gangs and their different things going on, their communities, etc. I'm trying to use words, I can't think of words. You know, all these different groups of people, and they're happy with that, and that is their connection, and that is they're connected to that group. They're not connected to everyone. See, we're really all connected. Anyone who's a human spiritual being should really be connected, if you take it from that belief, that fantasy, in other words, okay? Most people are just connected by a group, but that group is, you know, makes people feel happy and comfortable and safe. And so therefore you're not going to want to go with the person that wants to go through the looking glass, because it will mean, or even if you have to go alone through the looking glass, you're not going to want to do that, because you'll have to leave your safe community, your safe society, your safe reality, your safe group, or your safe friends, even family. You'll have to leave them behind. You're not going to want to do that, and then to go alone through the looking glass. You know, that's the main problem, I would say. I don't think I put this very well. I just made it all up as I went along, as you can see. When I say made it up, yes, fantasy, okay. But you know what I'm saying is that, okay. I think I will fold off here, because I don't think I've got enough time to talk about Life for Ruth, which was the movie that I was going to talk about at the start of the video. So this is what I'm saying. In this world, you can't even keep it simple. You can't concentrate. You can't, because it isn't simple. Because we've been so much in the dark, so much into this small fantasy world, this box on this other side of the looking glass. I don't know why I mentioned the looking glass. That came to me. It's probably not a very good analogy, or whatever the word is. Oh, if only I could put these things clearly. It's much better if you can get a concept. I'm not getting the concepts across at all. Yeah, see, this is the problem, is that not being able to keep it at simple levels even. Once you start to see too much of a bigger picture, and you're used to keeping everything simple, and you want to keep it simple, and we should have been able to keep it simple, because the simple thing is, as I've said before, we should be in, or at least, look, okay, fantasy scenario for me. I'm a natural human being. I'm connected to other natural human beings. I'm spiritual, so therefore my vibration and my feelings and my thoughts make either a good or a bad reality around me. It's as simple as that. And if in my fantasy world, if everything was natural and everything was a real natural earth with no interference and no governing forces and no restrictions and no limitations, and everyone was in that same knowledge, shall we say, And just at that simple level, just like a few animals living together, the basic concepts of, of everything would be very simple. Because essentially that's how it's meant to be. And it's as simple as that. And there's really no reason for us to be searching to be geniuses. Obviously, you can do it. Humans have abilities to do many things, but in their natural environment, they almost don't have to think too much. You know, if everything is just about creation, then everything else that we know means nothing anyway. All our science, all our mathematics, all the fancy things that we do, all the education and all the things where we think we know it all and we have all this information, all really means very little. It all really means that we're all just simple human spiritual beings that have the very power or the very essence of life and everything there really is in us anyway. So we don't really need to know anything. Everything that we know is really part of the construct of the matrix. Everything that we think is knowledge and information and makes us intelligent and all this sort of stuff, it's really mostly the matrix. It's mostly a manipulation to keep us from just being. But, you know, there's probably more to it than this, in the sense that the fact that we are here, I would imagine, and the fact that it's, as someone said in another video a long time ago, the fact that all of this is allowed. This is interesting because I'm going to say this. You know, the other day, I was down the shop, and shopping is very difficult for me these days because there's a lot of dark energy around, to say the very least. You know, I can't emphasize this enough. My fantasy world is a dark one. I don't want it to be, but it just is. And the fact that I don't want it to be and that it is tells me that there's something going on. This is why I say all this stuff. Because if the world was not dark around me, I wouldn't be making the video. I wouldn't want to, which I don't anyway, and I wouldn't need to, and there wouldn't be any point to. Even all the truth wouldn't matter because, you know, I'm not someone that's here to really, you know, there's plenty of people that can say all this stuff better than me and that know much more and that like to preach and like to do. That's really not, I don't think that was really my purpose for being here. But then again, who knows? Because we've all been kept in the dark, so I wouldn't know. Whatever my purpose for coming onto this earth, as it would have been kept from me most of my life, as it's kept from you, as it kept from most spiritual human beings. Because you don't get my whole conclusion. The only reason that I've even come to any of this, as I've said before, and I'm repeating myself, is that without an attack or without dark being around me, I would be unaware that there was any importance at all to a human being. I would go back to like when I was young and say, look at the millions of lights and feel powerless and completely alone and empty and useless and a victim of circumstances. But it's when you realise that you are doing very little in this world, as I have done nothing in this world, nothing at all. I have not, as I've said before, I've not done anything. I've not been I've not been involved in anything. I've not got opinions about most things. You probably say now she does. Well, this is only very recent. You know, I've not thought that the world was particularly spectacular for me. I've thought that it was just a survival at its very least, and very simple to say the least. Now, then when you start to see darkness around you, out of the blue, shall we say, almost, um, basically then it's just like, why? And so that is then when you say, well, if I've always been a victim of my circumstances, and I've always saw myself that way, to be honest, and I have been, um, I would say there would be no reason for me or someone like myself to need to be attacked or watched or controlled in any way, because basically I'm not a world beater. I'm not. I've like for instance, I was close to a hermit a lot of my life to some extent. So what would there be a reason to attack a hermit? There'd be no reason to, would there? Because a hermit has no physical input into the world. A hermit doesn't usually interact even with other people. So you could just leave that hermit on its own, to its own devices, because it can't do anything. So if a hermit is attacked, that hermit, if he's got any thinking ability, or have to say, why me? I'm a hermit. I live out in the middle of nowhere. I don't interact with people. I don't have any opinions about the world. I don't interact with most of the world. I tend to think that everything that happens is my own fault, nothing to do with my surroundings. Um, and I'm basically living at the lowest level a human being can live at, and basically just surviving. So why would other human beings, or even more so if you started to think that there was some importance behind the attacks, you'd have to say why. You have to say, I'm mystified. Could not be any physical or logical reason why this would happen. And this is where you have to then come into the fantasy realm, because then you have to start coming into a fantasy world of fairy tales, to where you say, hey, if you believe that your fantasy is a reality, and that these dark things are really happening, and that they are directed towards an innocent, non-influential human being, shall we say. So therefore, why would you care? Like, let that person just live out their days and die, and no relevance. Then you have to start saying, yeah, that hermit out in the shack, that's out in the middle of the desert, that cannot possibly have any influence on another human being. And supposing I'm a dark force, okay? I'm going to go and harass that hermit, even though he has done nothing to me. The hermit then has to say, why is that? But if it was just one person, you'd pass it off as coincidence and say that's just someone who's a little out of touch, got an aggressive streak, a cruel person, of course. And this is true too. Of course it is true in this world. But if it became to where it was a large group of people, or large amount of dark forces, or powerful human beings, powerful dark forces, a collective, huge number, then you would have to say, hey, why? And then you'd have to say that hermit must have some power that he is unaware of, because there would be no reason for him to be attacked otherwise. There would be no reason to keep that hermit in a state of panic, in a state of fear, in a state of low vibration. And this is where I come to. This is why I went along with those ideas, because to me it seemed then logical To me, it then seemed logical that the fantasy was the reality. If you want to look at it that way, then fantasy becomes reality because, hey, that hermit has no enemies. He doesn't interact with other human beings. So why would the world then want to, the dark forces, the dark world, the dark human beings want to attack the hermit, you see? A bit like Dermot, the character that I had in the other video. You know, Dermot left the Matrix. He didn't leave the Matrix voluntarily. He liked the Matrix because he was at a reasonable vibration, you see. But the Matrix didn't like him because he was at a reasonable vibration. He was retarded and innocent and didn't see negative around him even if it was there. He just didn't think that way. But that was, you'd have to say, if he was told to leave the Matrix involuntarily, because I don't think that he left voluntarily. I think that he has left the Matrix and defeated the Matrix in a way because high frequency individuals defeat the Matrix. But they're not wanted in the Matrix either because, as I say, we're all connected. And this is why the hermit has to be harassed too, because although he's really not doing anything consciously and not interested in the Matrix and not trying to affect the Matrix one way or the other, he's not trying to raise the vibration. But if he's a happy hermit or not too unhappy, he could well be raising that vibration. And that's why then the Matrix will, and this is how I come to the conclusion why I see this, why you see strange incidences of these sorts of things happening, because you say, hey, why would that be? You know, we can understand people being against people in power, maybe, that have a lot of influence, or even people who have a lot of money, all these sorts of things that really do seem to physically affect the Matrix in our real world. But when you see people that are, like if you saw a homeless person, you would say the Matrix has no reason to come down on that person. And because they have nothing by comparison. And yet that can happen. This must be for some other reason that you can't see. And this is what this was how I came to the, you know, with the information, putting it all together and seeing it as well, that there has to be merit in even, there may well be more merit in some so-called insignificant human beings. In fact, I in my fantasy realm, it's the human beings who are down the bottom in our society, shall we say, because our world is really made up of a society. It's all a society, it's all communities, it's all a construct, you know, it's all, you know, there's not individuals, there's not really that many hermits and individuals. But in our society, the people who are paid the most are the most successful, and they appear to be the most powerful. But as we live in a reverse world, as I've said before in other videos, it is a reverse world. So therefore, even though the most powerful and the rich and all that are the most rewarded, and they do have control over the Matrix completely, they do. They are the minions of the God entity, if you want to look at it in the fantasy realm, okay? But they rule the world, even if you just take this world to be just black and white as it appears to be, that it's only humans, and then we allow some humans to make more money than someone else, and we elevate some humans into a famous position, or we elevate some human beings because they have a particular skill or particular knowledge or particular academic or whatever, you know, in different fields that are also all created by the Matrix, all the different sciences, all the different fields are created. They're not just there. We create them. We create all the systems, we create all the science, we create all the different. I got this the other day. All the different subjects, even that we will learn, they're all separate. There's not one whole thing of anything. Whereas in reality, or in the fantasy reality, everything is very simple. There's no need for geology. There's no need for science. There's no need for mathematics. There's no need for all the different fields in a way. It's just one simple thing that the human being creates reality with their thinking and their emotions and their feelings, and that is all part of vibration and frequency, which is part of everything. Everything is frequency, vibration, and energy. That is the law of the universe, evidently. So therefore we are frequency and vibration, and we create the energy with our thinking. That's the solid matter type of thing, if you want to look at it that way. And, you know, so that's the simplicity of it. We don't need really all this other stuff. So actually the Dermot, that's why he was told to leave the Matrix. Well, he wasn't told to leave, he was pushed out of the Matrix. But, you know, because he was retarded. He didn't have any so-called intelligence or knowledge on those things. But in reality, you know, who knows why that is, that he couldn't converse at kind of basic levels, which like maybe I do or some other people do. You know, we're not geniuses, but you know what I mean. But there could have been a protection reason for that, you know, because in order for him to keep his high frequency, he might well have had to close off certain areas of even the normal way that we function in this world. In other words, he had to almost appear to be retarded, or to, I don't know, I don't understand that, but I'm assuming that something could have been a protection type thing, so that he could keep his, because, you know, how could you deny that that isn't the truth, or that that isn't the wisest thing to do? You know, because that's the only way that you're not going to be trapped in this world, is to have the high frequency. So if you have to then make yourself limited, even in this reality, in order to keep that high frequency, that could well be a wise move. I've gone off the track and I've no doubt confused you, but what I'm saying is that this is a reverse world. So temporarily, in this world, obviously some people are going to be rich and famous, and they're going to have all the goodies and all the comforts and all the luxury, and even more information. No doubt they might even get, some of them more, they might even be given more powers, more abilities. I don't know. They might be given a peek behind through the looking glass even. Some of them might even see quite a bit of the looking glass. I don't know. I would have to think that some people do. But as it's a reverse world, I'm kind of guessing, and this is only guessing and it could be wrong. I only say those things because I don't want to make statements, because I'm not in that position to do that. I don't have any qualifications for it. I don't have enough information, and also, you know, it's only what you think. Now, this video is not for me. I do it for myself in the sense that, sure, even though it's very stressful, it does get something off my chest, because it's a terrible burden, I find now. Because I'm not at high frequency, and because the world around me is very negative, it's a bit of a burden to at least speak it out, assuming that there's someone on the other end that understands this a little bit, or that at least comes from that fantasy point of view. Because most people, you know, I would say that in my own environment, there would be very few, actually none, that would be prepared to enter into that fantasy realm. And therefore, it's not like it's stress to have a bit of information and not be able to pass it on. More so as it's negative and you see it as diabolical and of an almost urgent need because you believe your fantasy. You believe that I am in Wonderland, and I believe that I'm in Hansel and Gretel, okay? I'm just trying to think of the fairy tales. I believe I'm in Hansel and Gretel. I believe I'm in the dark forest. And I believe that the trees around me are lurking and trying to injure me. I believe that the wind is the devil himself. And I believe that it is all dark and frightening around me. And when I get to the cottage and the dear old lady tries to help me, and my brother or whatever, as the fairy tale goes, okay? But actually I don't have the brother, so it's even worse if you're on your own. But I believe at some point I'm in the cottage and the dear old lady is going to look after us because we're frightened. We've come from the forest where everything is trying to injure us and attack us. And we're frightened and we don't understand what's going on. We don't understand the world, that's right. And we think that we've found a safe haven when we get to the cottage, and the dear little old lady is going to feed us and look after us and keep us safe from this dark forest that's around us. But at some point, we wake up and get a glimpse behind the curtain, a glimpse through the looking glass, and see that the dear old lady is not a dear old lady. The cottage is not any safer than the forest. In fact, it's more dangerous than even the forest, because the forest, although it's been trying to attack us with the trees, it actually didn't harm us at all. But the little old lady is going to push us into the oven and cook us for dinner. I'm not sure what point I made with that. Make of it what you will. But the real safe reality, the cottage with the dear old lady, the real reality that I thought was the safe reality, that we thought was the safe reality, turned out to be more dangerous than the fantasy world out there, because out there it appeared to be more fearful because it wasn't familiar to us. But in reality, we could manipulate that better. Where we thought we were comfortable with the little old lady, with our fellow human beings, we were going to be pushed in the oven and ate for lunch. So, getting back to the fantasy, even though we are in the dark forest, with the wind and the devil on the wind howling around us and the trees all trying to attack us and engulf us, it is only through our other human beings that we can really be thrown in the oven and eaten. Because the devil can blow on the wind. He can howl all around you. He can send the trees to attack you or appear to attack you, but he really can't touch you. But if he can get the little old lady to become sinister and become evil, shall we say, and become to where she doesn't no longer want to eat natural food, and she wants to cook you and me, you know, the little boy and the little girl, for dinner, push us into the oven and convince us to go into the oven too, so she actually has to say, look, just have a little look in the oven, you know. And it was only that if you wake up just before she pushes you into the oven, like in the fairy tale. But that's the little old lady. Oh, I'm a little old lady. I do hope I'm not pushing anyone into the oven. Maybe I am, you know, because, you know, to be quite frank, as I've said before, can't emphasize this enough, there is no distinction now between reality and fantasy. At least in my world there isn't. There's no distinction between sanity and insanity. There's no distinction between one thing that you see on a television program or another. There's no distinction between me making this video and someone else making it. You will not be able to tell whether I'm the little old lady wanting to really feed you some really nice food and give you a comfortable place to stay from the bad world that's around you, or whether I'm the little old lady that's going to push you into the oven and cook you for dinner. You will not be able to tell me that's making this video right now from another person that's making the video. You will not know the difference. You won't know the difference. None of us will. Your only hope is that, like Hansel and Gretel, the little boy and the little girl, the brother and sister, that woke up just the second before they were going to be pushed into the oven and cooked for dinner by the little old lady. And I would personally think that those are the people who are able to go through the looking glass, push through it, regardless of fear. Because if they think they're safe in the cottage with the little old lady, in their reality, they may not be. So I'm going to fold off. So much for Life for Ruth. I was going to talk about the movie Life is Ruth. I guess I'll have to leave that for another video. I would love to talk about a million movies, and particularly the newer movies. I don't see most of them, but they will show you probably more of the so-called fantasy future fake reality, okay? But I would like to talk about those movies, but I probably will mainly talk about older ones because they're the ones I've seen. But even they have relevance, I think. But you know, that's for each person to decide. Movies are made for that reason. Even if you believe they're true, or if they're partly true, or if they're a possibility, or if they're just total fantasy of some brilliant writer's imagination and some great actors and all this sort of stuff, and it's just all put together for your entertainment and your amusement, that's okay too. I would say that even when I didn't believe in make-believe and didn't, I would say that I always said, even when I was like 15 years old, when I started to watch movies, I used to actually say, I have learnt more from watching movies than what I learnt at school. And that was only watching like love stories, because I learnt about human nature to some extent, or the possibilities of human nature. But now I would extend that if you look at the vast array of movies and the number that's been made. But anyway, like I say, I was going to talk about Life for Ruth, and that's a very simple little movie. And if anyone is interested, if there is anyone listening and you're interested, you could look at it for nothing, I'm sure, because it's called Life for Ruth. It's a very old British movie, with unknown actors almost in it, or at least they were very, very unknown at the time, and most of them, B actors as far as acting and that, apart from one that did go on to make many TV things. But that aside, at the time, they were all unknown B actors. The movie itself, I will go talk about that only because I find it interesting, and there's just something that I wanted to put out there in this fantasy world about it. But go and look at it if you can. If you see it before I talk about it, you probably automatically get something out of it. And it's a good little movie anyway, because it is good in the sense that after it was made, and I don't know whether this had anything to do with the movie, it probably didn't. It would have probably been based on reality. A whole law was changed. In other words, reality was changed. And that was the basis of the movie, the idea of the incident that happened in the movie. And the movie's called Life for Ruth, an old 1960s British movie. Have a look at it and see what you think about it yourself. If you can look at black and white, some people look. You have to get past these things, and you don't have to read I want. I'm just saying that for some people, it might just not so much raise an interesting point, but this was how some people thought back then, and I just wanted to put it from a reverse world concept. And I don't think I've got time to talk about it now because, as you can see, I've hopelessly made another terrible video in the sense that what I was the title, I haven't even discussed it because I've got so consumed by what I would say the stress of my fantasy or my reality, depending on whether you think that I've gone out of touch with this real world or whether you think it's a possibility or whether you think it is a reality. But certainly, if you enter too much into the fairyland world, I say I've been pushed into it, but you would say, hey, no, that's what's happened. And that is certainly true. But it is a interesting point, a bit like I said about time. And this is not just what I say, but it is what some people do think. And it, in a funny kind of way, even so-called normal, real people that live in this real world would still have to say, yes, time is really just all the same. Past, present and future. In fact, some people that live very much in the past will openly say, I can't get away from the past. So in other words, the past really is the present. And then the present is the future, you see. So it's all the same. It's really just one timeline in a way. And if you could see that, as no doubt the God entity and others can probably see it, then it becomes a lot more crystal clear. If we had that information or that ability, which we probably should have, then our whole way of looking at the now, it would be totally different. And I wouldn't be sitting here making this video being stressed by everything, And it's the same with this idea that I'm saying there is no reality. It's all one big fantasy. I'm saying my fantasy and my fairy tales are as real as the real world. So therefore there's no difference. There's no cut-off. It's all a fantasy. It's only a question of whether you choose to come into my dark fantasy world with me, whether you share that fantasy, or whether you are part of society or a community or a group or whatever your world is, what group of people you're in, to where you say that is your reality and I am out of touch and mine is fantasy. It's all in my imagination. It doesn't exist. It doesn't happen. Whereas I guess I'm saying it's like time. It's all one and the same. There is no reality. Everything that is fantasy is also reality. It's all reality or it's all fantasy, depending on what words you want to use. But I'm saying that it's it's just that some of us only, you know, some of us will be Hansel and Gretel that will be pushed into the oven and cooked for dinner because we will refuse to believe that the little old lady is sinister and is a dark demon, or that she's even a human that's just, who knows, that's turned wrong or working for the dark, or some wizard or something. I don't know. But you see what I'm saying? But that's how the fairy tale goes. And you could be frightened of the forest more than that little house. But you should probably be more frightened. They were safer out in the forest than what they were in the comfortable little house with the dear little old lady, the two little children. You see what I'm saying? So some people will be quite happy in their reality until they're in the oven, shall we say, almost. That's just me, because I'm saying that's the fairy tale and that's the reality. But that's, like I say, it all depends on. They'll probably be happier until that last minute anyway, because I guess I'm saying that my fantasy is that it's terrifying out in the forest, but you're not safe in the house either. So where are you safe? And that's because Hansel and Gretel don't really know what the reality is. They can't distinguish. They can't tell the safe reality. They can't tell I'm confusing myself and whatever here because it is confusing, but there is no. I guess what I'm saying is that if the world, if the reality and the fantasy becomes very dark, in other words, if the dark entity, God, controls all everything, then there is not a lot of safe places, you know. But what you presume to be the most safe might actually be the most dangerous. I guess if you take the fairy tale, that's right. You know, like Hansel and Gretel. I mean, I'm Gretel, okay, and you know, I'm greatly relieved to see the little old lady in the house, and I won't want to go back out into the frightening forest in the middle of the night with the rain and the wind blowing and the trees and everything attacking. If you've read the fairy tale, there again, read the fairy tale, have a look at life for Ruth if you're inclined to. And if I make another video, if I'm still here, I might just mention that. And you know, obviously if you see it, you won't even need to probably watch the video. But I suppose, you know, only for those that aren't, because it has strong religious connotations, the movie Life for Ruth. You know, it's based on a religion or a belief in a religion. Not a religion I know anything about, or any religion that I have. I don't have affiliations to any religions. I've said this before. To me, it's a matrix controlled by an entity that controls everything. So you know, that's just my basic core thing at the present time. So I don't have any affiliations to any religions. But that doesn't mean there isn't some truth in some things. I do not have answers to these. I will merely put out some things, some quotes, maybe some things that you know, I might even be leaning in some directions at different times. But I don't think that that's not where I've been in the past, and that's not. And I think, you know, it's like I say, if you're operating from fear, as I am even at the present time, and this is not how you should be, And if my circumstances were slightly different, I would have no problem being a lot more direct in the videos. Or by that I mean that I might even just openly say my opinions on things about different things at a given time, even specific things. I could give opinions, because if you're not in fear, you'd probably say, well, even if I'm giving a wrong opinion, or even if I'm giving an opinion, that I might change my mind on that opinion next week or next year. You know, it's perfectly okay for people to have an idea or an opinion or even a belief at a given time and to change that. And that's another thing that happens quite a bit in this world at the moment too. I notice that things are changing at very basic and even very levels that surprises me that they would change, because you would think that some things probably could not be changed, or at least they couldn't be altered if you have certain beliefs. But this is a very changeable world that we're in now, and that actually would perhaps lend some credence to what I'm saying, that we are in a lot more of a fantasy world, because if things change, and it's a bit like if you change, that movie changed the law, The Life of Ruth, so that's a good example. And this is the world we're living in now, where rules and laws even, they're the things that we follow in our so-called society, rightly or wrongly. And they can be changed in the blink of an eye. So that's interesting too, because usually things like that don't tend to change very often. Usually you'd almost have to go to a different area or wipe something out or have a complete change of things before actual basic things are changed, shall we say. But I don't, in today's world, things could it's almost as though, it's almost as though we are living in the fantasy world, to where, it's unstable. It's very disconcerting to us limited human beings, because if we didn't see ourselves as limited and actually knew that we had a little bit more input, and that we are meant to be a lot more interacting with one another, and a lot more, but I mean interacting just at a vibrational level. I don't mean interacting the way we do act, where we're physically, like in groups or gangs and situations where we're actually physically doing things. I mean just at a purely thinking vibrational level. Um, that's not happening, and that's really how it was. Well, that's how, I assume that it's supposed to be if we're spiritual beings on that, because you have to take everything, as I say, from the basic beliefs or the basic ideas. And if you don't think those ideas are true and they're not a basic thing for you, then um, as I've said before, clearly that's okay. That really means that this video is not so much not for you. You can still listen to it, but you will just see it as fantasy, and it will be fantasy for you. And if it is fantasy for you, then that is your reality. I obviously see myself as living in fairyland, and everyone else is in reality, or at least most people is in reality. At least those around me I see in reality. I'm not saying there aren't other people around the world that are in fantasy too, but I'm not actually in contact with those, and not able to contact those either, I might emphasis. And that I have observed is something that happens, because if I mentioned the telephone, okay, that's an example. Like if if I'm in fantasy reality, and then I share that fantasy with someone else, then that becomes a bigger reality. So the matrix will probably make it difficult for the people who are in one fantasy reality to be in contact with people who are in that same fantasy reality, because then they become a community, a gang, a group, a family, a situation that is something that will rock the other reality, the so-called real reality. That's assuming, well, even if you just take it from a reality point of view, numbers are everything anyway, aren't they? Like, supposing everything I say is total rubbish, okay? And it could be. It's fantasy anyway for most people, and it's fantasy. I'm saying it is fantasy for me because that is my world and it is separate from what a lot of other people see, so therefore it's fantasy. But you know, numbers are still everything in this world, even if you take it from a real point of view. So, you know, any groups of people that get in a large number are then, if they're of a different reality to other people, they should all be able to coexist, but that's not how this world works. It does tend to be this business of we all have to be the same. We all have to be a society. We all have to be a group. We all have to agree on everything. And sometimes we do this consciously. I think most people do it subconsciously. I think most people tend to be part of a society, but they don't really know what the society is. I know I didn't. I didn't know what this society was at all, ever. But I was still living in it. I felt out of place with it, but I felt that it was safe, like Hansel and Gretel. When they got into the cottage with the little old lady, they thought they were finally safe, finally had a safe place to stay, a warm bed to sleep on, some food to be cooked. They didn't think that they were going to be the cooked dinner. No. So, you know, as I've said before, so I don't know where this Hansel and Gretel thing come from. It was never even one of my favourite fairy tales. In fact, to tell you the truth, most of my favourite fairy tales, although I'm sure you're not interested, were much more the more happy end. Well, that had a happy ending, I suppose. But I remember when I did read Hansel and Gretel when I was a child, it was never one of my favourites because I did find it even more sinister than Cinderella, for instance, who, yes, had the wicked stepsisters and the wicked, and you know, all that sort of stuff, and the same with various other ones, where there was always some evil in a lot of fairy tales. If you look at it, there always was dark forces. But that one in Hansel and Gretel, to me, for like, these are for children. Don't forget fairy tales. So you kind of say, hey, these are children's books for little children. And children don't really think about all these sorts of things. Children don't actually think about evil or bad stuff unless it's either in their life or it's presented to them in a fairy tale. Like, you kind of think that fairy tales should make children happy because they're fantasy, so they're made up for children to just enter into the fairy world. And instead you have this quite sinister fairy tale in Hansel and Gretel, if you really think about it, which even when I was a child I thought, oh, what a strange thing to put in a book. Like, it was so away from, because it was actually kind of real, because she was a little old lady and it was a cottage. So it was like, oh, why would she do that? Like, she's not like the wicked queen in Snow White, where she got really jealous and, you know, and she was a certain way, you know, she was queen and she was arrogant, all this, you know, all that sort of stuff, you know, and vain and all that. You know, there seemed to be more common sense, whereas that seemed to be really very out there, very, is that the word, very, I wish I could put these things better in a nice way and in a way that makes sense. But you know what I'm saying, it was kind of really surprising that they would put this in a fairy tale and that the little old lady would, like, it's never actually explained why she would do that. Why would she even want to do that? Like, even if she was really bad, shall we say, like, why would she do that? Because it wouldn't be appetizing, would it? Would it? Like, where is this coming from? Like, what human would find a child appetizing? I couldn't get that in the video, in the book at all. I thought this is strange that they should put this in there, or that this should even be a possibility, you know, a fairy tale, and quite horrified, really, in a way. Like I say, but at any rate, I've rambled on and did not do the video. Very sorry about that. I might get back to it when I get some more energy. Maybe, you know, I wanted to talk about life for Ruth because I thought that would be simple for once, and there again, you know, they're just the, what's the word? Is it musings? I'm trying to use fancy words. I need to get a dictionary or something. I could have picked up a dictionary. It was out at the cleanup a few weeks ago. Saw a big, huge dictionary. Should have picked it up. Could have picked it up. It was free, left there. Might have picked up some good words to impress you with the video, and to make sense too, because words, even low, words have the meaning. And if you use the right words, people get what you're trying to say. Whereas if you're like me, trying to put an idea or just even the fantasies across, it's not coming across coherent if I don't have the right words. Sometimes one word sums up things instead of 1,000 words, you know. And like I say, should have picked up the dictionary and maybe looked up some words. But anyway, I'm sorry that the video, I hope it didn't waste your time. But like I say, the Matrix controls everything. I just wanted to say that because, particularly the telephone, okay? Particularly the technology. Do not presume that you can contact things so easily. No. I live in Sydney. I have a telephone. I have a mobile. I do not know the mobile phone number at the moment. I have not used this much for that purpose. I have a telephone, old-fashioned telephone line, which I think is actually better for people anyways. You know, I'm not for technology at a level. I do not like the frequencies of the Wi-Fi so much. I do not think that is as good for our frequencies. But, you know, that's opinion too, and that's, you know, it tends to make me feel bad, amongst other things. But the old telephone line, that works, it's operating. But many people call me, well, not many, but, you know, I have heard that people have, as I said, rang, but I don't get it. So, you know, it's a matrix. Technology in particular is the inventions of the gods, and you might say it's the invention of humans. Well, you know, that depends on which fantasy world you're coming from, because obviously, as I say, if you go through the looking glass, you would see another world and different technology. See, it's not even about technology too. So technology, I don't understand technology. I'm the first to admit I'm totally ignorant, but I would imagine that different technologies have different frequencies, because everything is frequency. So therefore some technologies would be more natural than others. Some would be different frequencies, and those frequencies may or may not interact with our bodies, go through our bodies, better, worse, whatever, you know, because it's not a real world, at least not if you're in the fantasy Archon world that I tend to ramble about in these videos. And it's not a natural world, whichever way you look at it. My personal thing has all, as I've said before, that human beings are fish out of water in this world now. We are literally fish out of water in this world now. That's how I see it. That's how I feel about it. That's my reality. Whether it's your reality is another thing, you know. But I think we are fish out of water. You can take that figuratively, is that the word? Or you can take it literally. Fish out of water. What happens to fish out of water? Okay. Thank you for listening if anyone has. I was doing the videos at a late time. It is very late here, or very early, depending on how you look at it. It is dark, but very little disturbances because of that, and actually not one disturbance apart from my voice being very much hit with bad frequencies. But aside from that, are actually around me, very quiet for once. And that's why I don't know what times are, because these videos would be going out to all different places, because where I am, I'm not even sure what the time is, because no doubt I've been rambling for hours. Anyone that listens to my videos right through for the time, you should be given a VC or some sort of medal, or rewarded in vast amounts of money for being able to listen for so long, because it's not a question of whether you think that anything I say makes sense, but I could make these points in half the time and I don't know how to do it. But also, it's just that I know myself. In this world that we live in, I know this myself. I'm guilty of it myself. Like, I will put a video on and not watch it right through, even though I think it's a good video. Just because of my impatience, because of trying to get too much information in too quick, and being plagued by this illusion of time. But also, I would, to give myself a little bit of leeway here before I finish. If the world was not as it is, or my fantasy world was not as it is, I would be quite happy to watch most videos right through, regardless of how long. More so if I think they're interesting and, somehow give me something that I didn't have before, which is often the case. Even if you can I just say if I can pick up something new that adds to something that might be a benefit. Doesn't seem to be, because the benefits I'd still say that in this reality, if it's false and if it is a fantasy and we're not aware of it, unless most of us wake up to this, and I personally enter into the fantasy idea that there was supposed to be an unveiling. You're supposed to see through the veil. There was an old TV show that I used to watch, there again, very old, Beyond the Veil. Now I would say that's not fantasy either. But when I used to watch it, I thought, what a scary fantasy program. I liked watching it because it was taking you into dark realms and you knew that it was fantasy. Now I say that's reality, so that's just the difference, What was once fantasy is now reality. But Beyond the Veil, yeah, we were supposed to be going beyond the veil, lifting the veil. Everyone was supposed to be doing it. Everyone that has that capability, as all human beings, I think, are meant to. And some have. Some do it the hard way. Some lift the veil the hard way. But at the present time, I'm of the idea that I've been informed, and I don't know how true it is, that this veil that's covered human beings, all of us, including myself, because like I say, I was not one of those that sorted out. So no credit to me. But at this time, doesn't matter who or what you are, For some reason, the veil was going to be lifted for everyone. It didn't matter whether you thought about, whether you just didn't think about nothing and didn't care about anything, you would see the true reality. And this is how it was meant to be for all human beings, all along. But, this was supposed to be a period of time for that. And it was supposed to just happen naturally, without any effort from most people. Now, because that veil is being deliberately held down by other forces, shall we say, so that it can't be lifted, so that everyone still stays in the dark, almost, you could say, in dark ages. Yeah, we are really in the dark ages. We have been all along, but now it's really dark because we were meant to be seeing at least this, and therefore you have a choice. Whereas most of the time, as I've said before, we're all making choices all the time, but we're making them in the dark. We're making choices every day. All of us, myself included, all my life, made choices in the dark. How can you make a proper choice when you're in the dark? How can you make the right choice when you're in the dark? In fact, most of the time you're not even aware you're making choices when you're in the dark, and yet you are. So, and you're certainly not aware that your choices affect, like the whole earth, shall we say. You think that they would, and even if they only affect around you, that spreads because everything is a frequency and vibration. I would imagine that frequency and vibrations just keep going. I'm not sure. Could be totally wrong about that, but I would think that could be a possibility. But, I'm not a scientist, even at a very basic level. I'm a very ignorant human being, so, that is, but certainly it does affect in close vicinity at the very least. And if you believe that we're all connected, then and the airways or the frequencies are clear, shall we say, clear of other frequencies, then there's no reason that it shouldn't be a continual thing. But I won't. I was folding off, but I will add that we are being deluded, or at least, I shouldn't say deluded, but I think it's a bit of a delusion. But then again, who knows? You might think I'm in the delusion, so it's opinion. But, I've seen ads on the television where, recently where that idea of us all being one consciousness, or connected, or with all others throughout all the earth, all combined as one through technology, is pushed. Well, certainly pushed to me anyway, in a very impressive ad that I saw on the television. So I have no problem saying that it was, right in your face, and very impressive too, and making it seem so enlightened that we should be combined all as one through this one technology, this internet, is it, or whatever, and how far this will go is another thing, but and that idea that we'll be all one consciousness through technology, in the ad, that and as though the girl in it was so wonderful, and she was so at one with the universe and one with the world, and everything beautiful, and no doubt becoming super intelligent and super connection, and this whole concept and idea so very desirable being flooded into my head. I should just have to rush out and get connected to it. Well, we already are, so we already are actually. I'm having trouble sending my little I can't get someone to ring me on a telephone, and I can't ring out on the telephone, but I've got this super consciousness of technology that's all around me, you know, with the internet, you know. But at any rate, I've made a video, so I suppose that's, I'm not sure why that's okay, but I guess it is, so I don't know, you know, I don't know, I don't know, okay, but maybe you will know, maybe, you know, some people will figure it out, some people will go lift the veil, some people will go through the looking glass. The more people that do this, at least then you've got a clear idea. This is essential now because I think that, as I've said before, to raise the frequency on your own in a world of war, in a world of negative just negative all around, regardless of where you are. But obviously, the more, as I've said before, if you're the hermit out in the outback, you know, you will still be attacked if you are at a different frequency to the rest of the earth. Because heaven forbid that we should want to have a high frequency on this earth. And look, if everyone is happy with low frequency, if everyone wants to be in a dark fantasy world, which we are, you know, for some, this will be a world that they like. The little old lady obviously likes eating Hansel and Gretel for dinner. You know, who am I to dispute this? It's more a question of whether Hansel and Gretel want to go into the oven. They were going in voluntarily, don't forget. You know, whether they want to run away as they did and go back into the forest and perhaps hopefully find their way home, which they did in the fairy tale. But, you know, they had to go through a lot of fear to get home, and they had to wake up and not be fearful of the forest and realise what they really should be fearful of, the truth of whether they should fear the forest or the cottage with the little old lady. In other words, to know what they really should fear. And this is, I think, the main thing for most of us, is what we should really fear. Are we fearing the wrong things? And the things that we should fear, are we not comfortable with? You know, at least that's Hansel and Gretel, okay? And that's just, you know, what you want to make of it, okay? But certainly that's been my life anyway. A lot of things that I probably should have feared, I wasn't fearful of. And then the things that I was fearful of, other people were not fearful of, and I should not have been fearful of. So, you know, you can get it wrong. You can get it wrong. I know I've got it wrong. So, you know, so that's just a thought anyway. I don't know, you know, I'm probably not telling anyone anything by this, but I make some funny videos, don't I, really? Except that they're not funny, but they're peculiar, but they're not funny. Anyway, maybe I might get back to life for Ruth, which I was supposed to. So, sorry that I didn't do that. And my papers got blown down by a mystical wind that didn't exist, but who knows? It is possible that there's a logical explanation for that. And sometimes, even later on, when you see something strange happen, you will find another logical explanation. So we do a lot to ourselves too. You know what I mean? Like, before I go, a bit like in that, oh, my throat is killing me. Oh dear, heal yourself, throat, by all means, geez, sorry about that, so sorry. Like in The Matrix, where I seem to remember a scene where Neo knocks the main character in it, Neo, his name is, knocks the plant or something, the pot over accidentally after the lady had made some comment to him, and she was kind of like saying to him, you know, did you really knock it over, or was she saying to him, did not your thought, if I had not put that thought into your head, the plant would probably have not been knocked over. Was it knocked over by me putting that thought to you and then your thought knocking it over? That's interesting. That just occurred to me about the movie The Matrix, because there's a lot in that movie. There's a lot in so many movies. Oh, you think of a million movies. I don't know how many movies have been made, but if you can get so much out of just one even, it really makes you think that even if you don't think there's any merit to them having 100% reality, you can still get some things out of it. Even at basic levels, I still say movies are very, very, very informative one way or the other. How much informative is up to you. I always thought they were informative, but I thought they were just informative about human nature because I didn't meet many people. So I thought, oh, I learned a bit more about life. But now I would say that everything in a movie is something to be looked at. And quite a lot of it you can relate to reality anyway. But anyway, better go because I'm quite exhausted and I think I went on too long. And I may say that everything is a fantasy. But by God, this fantasy feels very, very real. It's one thing to say this world is fantasy and I'm living in fantasy world, whether it's a pleasant fantasy or a dark fantasy. But it is very, very real just the same while you're living it and while you're in it. The secret is definitely, if you can do it, is to not believe it, not believe the fantasy or the reality too strongly, because it is very, it's very real, and it's, you know, like I say, if it was all positive, it'd be one, you know, great big heaven for everyone, but it can't be that way in a duality world anyway. This is a duality world controlled by a duality God entity. You know, the minute you bring love, hate into your world, the minute you bring right, wrong into your world, the minute you bring contrasting things in, it can't be helped that you're going to have the potential to set up a situation where there is going to be conflict, where there is going to be no harmony. And there's two ways of looking at harmony before I finish it. Just these things just come to me, and I'm arrogant to think that you'll even listen or that you'll be interested, but turn it off if you will. You've probably fell asleep by now anyway, but I've lost the thought. The duality creates the conflict. Yes. Yes, exactly. Yes, I've lost that thought. You see, this is what I'm saying, is that you can't keep on the thought even. But essentially, yes, once you have that, once you bring in that duality, that those conflicts, those ideas, like I said before, even the fairy tale. Children, if left alone, left to their own devices and not, even if you pick up a fairy tale, that's right, if you read about Hansel and Gretel, you're like, oh gosh, the little old lady can't do that. This is not, why is this here? Look, it's like that. It fills you with, this is introduced into our thinking, is what I'm saying. Without things being introduced into your thinking, we would not think them properly. So that is the construct of the world in order to keep us limited, because then you're limited, because if you bring that fear in, if you bring that negative in, if you bring that evil even into the fairy tale, all of a sudden, see, some people might like this. They might say, hey, that's fun. I want a duality world. This is what just come to me. They don't want it all to be all on the one level, all high frequency, all harmony, all... in fact, it's impossible to imagine it because we've just never experienced it or seen it, or even it's never been a possibility. We brought into a duality world. But when you think of it, the downside of that, if you're coming from this perspective of vibration and stuff, is that sure, it might be fun for me to talk about my vampire movies and my fairy tales and my horror movies and my monster movies and my technology going berserk and my mechanical devices, destroying me and fighting me, and all these machines everywhere, the different things that we see in movies and stuff. Sure, this might be exciting. It might say, oh, it'd be so boring if we were just sitting in a field under a tree. But that actually, if you're coming from that point of view of vibration and frequency, and that you raise to where you have other levels of other abilities, other levels of consciousness, etc., right? Then actually it's the opposite, I would imagine. I would imagine that then you would have a whole new world opened up to where you could have, you probably could do things, but at a safe level. You probably would be limitless almost, because you would know so much, and you would have all physical abilities too, but you would probably be, you see, then you would be in control of them. And see, in this world we have the duality, but it really is a real threat to us, because in this reality it feels very real, and it's quite painful. Whereas to play in a video game and to know you are safe, that's fun. That's exciting. You still get the excitement of the video game, but no harm can come to you. In this video game that we play in on this earth, it is real. We can get hurt. We do feel the pain. We are frightened. We are in real fear. It's not exciting fear. It's not fun. And it doesn't benefit us. We don't gain anything by the game. We don't learn by it. We get nothing out of it. We don't get anything. We don't learn any skills by it. In fact, the opposite. Our skills are reduced, and we're in the dark. We're behind the veil. We're on the other side of the looking glass. So it's a very, in fact, you would have to say that if it's a deliberate game, and if the God entity has any purpose, and if there's some benefit to it, it would have to be purely at some sort of spiritual level. It would have to be, because there's no real physical benefits to it. We don't gain any of our physical skills. They are suppressed. Everything in our body is closed down. Our body is at the lowest level. physically we are at the worst. I know we might look at some humans and say, oh, that's a wonderful athlete, they do remarkable things, sure, but that is still probably quite limited, I would imagine. It's still only a skill in a very small area, whereas humans, I think, are meant to have skills in vast areas. Now, I better close off, even though I once again need to close off, but I just was going to say that see, the minute my mind goes on to something, but it's like, I just say this before I go, I've gone too long. This is just an example, okay? Like on this earth, we have ourselves and we have lots and lots of animals. And you know yourself, I was only thinking this and discussed it a little bit the other day. Not that anyone's much interested, but you know, like we have certain skills as human beings, but if you look around the planet, the few species that are left, you know, the few life forms that are left, they have different skills to us. And if you isolate each individual skill of, say, each animal, like a bird can fly, other animals can swim underwater, some can go on land, you know, that they have, some of them have quite remarkable physical skills. Now, for instance, just coming to light, okay, like for instance, some animals can hibernate, right? I mentioned before that some animals, even the cat that's outside, can regulate its body temperature